Hi, this is Pastor Kyrmen Ray of Trafalgar Christian Church, here to share with you some Good Friday reflections. For Christians, today is a very important day as we remember Jesus' crucifixion and the events surrounding it. I'd like to read to you from the Gospel of John as we recall what Jesus experienced. It's kind of a long reading, but it's a story we need to hear. If you want to read along with me, I'm beginning in chapter 18 with verse 28, and I'll read all the way through chapter 19. Our text picks up after Jesus has been arrested and taken to be questioned by the high priest Caiaphas. Then Jesus was bound and taken to the headquarters of Pilate, the Roman governor. Hear now the story of what happened that day. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you this about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is the truth?" After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a bandit. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God." Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. Then the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see who will get it." This was to fulfill what the scripture says. "They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots." And that is what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop, and they held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The story we have shared is one of great suffering. We've read of betrayal, disloyalty, denial. We've heard of threats, humiliation, torture, abandonment, loneliness, and an agonizing death. Our senses are assaulted by the brutality of what Jesus endured. The physical, spiritual, and emotional agony he must have experienced, it's hard for me to comprehend. Right now, our world is facing suffering that is challenging our ability to cope. People are getting sick. Many of them are dying. In my work as a hospital chaplain intern, I had the privilege of witnessing many good deaths. By a good death, I mean that the dying person was surrounded by loved ones, and everyone had a chance to say their goodbyes. Perhaps the cruelest thing of all about the coronavirus is that it is denying people that kind of death, and denying their loved ones the final words, that last caress, the last squeeze of a hand they so desire. There is pain and a suffering in these losses that is hard to process. Our grief is deep, and for some, it is almost too much to bear. We're sustaining other kinds of losses in this crisis as well. Many are out of work, and others have had to close the businesses that are their livelihood. Some do not know how their bills will be paid. Families who depend on their children being fed at school are struggling to put enough on the table. Folks who were already living on the margins of our society have been pushed so close to the edge that they are at risk of falling over that edge. There is real fear about what the future holds. Why is this happening to us? Why all this suffering? And where is Jesus in all this mess? I have no answer to the question of why. And in fact, I don't think there is an answer to that question. But I believe that Jesus, the Jesus who knows all about suffering, is present with us in the pain. Jesus did not run from suffering. He chose it. He spread out his arms on a cross and showed us what love is. Love is willing to sacrifice on behalf of another. Love doesn't quit or give up or loosen its grip. Love doesn't turn tail and run. Love stays. Love gives. Love abides. Love endures. So where is Jesus in the midst of our present pain? Jesus is sitting at the kitchen table next to the parent who is trying to make the food stretch to fill her children's bellies. Jesus is sitting across the desk from the business owner whose head is in his hands as he grapples with having to let his employees go. Jesus is in the hospital rooms and the corridors with the worn-out nurses and doctors and hospital staff as they move from patient to patient. Jesus sits with the family members who wait at home to hear by phone if their loved one is going to pull through because they're not allowed in the hospital room. Jesus rests with a senior citizen who is confined to her room in a nursing home and who is feeling the coldness of isolation. Jesus is with the husbands and the wives and the sons and the daughters who could not be near when their loved one died. And Jesus is at the bedside of every victim of COVID-19 who breathes their last breath in a hospital room where family members were not allowed to come in. And I believe that the first tears shed in every one of these spaces are the tears of Christ, who grieves with us, who mourns with us, who weeps with us. Today, on this Good Friday, look upon the suffering of Jesus. Remember him on the cross, and know that there is no pain that he fails to understand, no grief that is beyond his comprehension, and no agony in which he does not share. The crucified Jesus bore all the shame, all the pain, all the suffering the world could heap upon him. And he will help us bear whatever may come. I thank you for joining me today, and I invite you to come and visit our YouTube channel again on Sunday as we celebrate Christ's resurrection at 10:30 a.m. Until then, may you find blessings in this time of stillness as the earth waits for resurrection.